Yep. Okay, so for the presentation today, first I'm going to do a Dash introduction. Then I'm going to go over some sample applications so we can see what's possible. And then if we have time, I'll just do a super simple demo so you guys can check out the code and the structure used to create the Dash applications. So I'm going to start with a quick overview of Plotly. So Dash is relatively new. We released it about a year and a half ago. So it's a relatively new project from Plotly. So at Plotly, we have a lot of moving parts going on. So first we have Plotly.js, which is our open sourced JS charting library. And this is built on top of D3 and StackGL. And then we have some APIs for common data science languages. So you guys may have seen John Muse's talk earlier about our Python API. And we also have R, MATLAB, Julia. So then we have Chart Studio, which is our online platform. And this also includes a graphical user interface. So if you don't quite program or you work with colleagues that don't program, this is a good tool to get up and running with the same visualizations that you can create in Python or JavaScript. And then finally, we have Dash, which is what I'll be focusing on today. And this is our framework for building web applications, and this is going to be in pure Python. So just to get started, if you guys aren't familiar with Plotly, they're interactive visualizations. So you can click on the legend to remove things, click and drag to zoom. And we also have hover information there. So these are just some of my favorite charts, so we can just see also annotations if you want to create a periodic table, and animations as well. So, so that's just a little taste of some of the visualizations that we're creating. So now to get into the main topic of Dash. So what is Dash? You're looking at it. I've done this presentation as a Dash app. And so, basically, like I mentioned, it's just our productive framework for building web applications in Python. So we created this so that people that are doing their data analysis in Python can just take it all the way and get their presentation and web application and everything up and running in that language that they're comfortable with. So again, it's particularly suited for anyone working in Python. And we built this on top of Plotly.js for the graphing, and then Flask and React.js. So the components are basically wrappers around a lot of React components. So the goal was to just abstract away the protocols that are typically required to build interactive web applications and create a simple framework for users to code their applications. And so these apps are rendered in the web browser, as you can see. And you can deploy your apps to servers and then share them via URLs. And then since they're run in the browser, it's inherently cross-platform, and then it works on mobile as well. So to get started with Dash, I've just embedded our Dash documentation in my presentation here. So the URL for that is plot.ly/dash or dash.plot.ly. We'll redirect. And that's a Dash app as well, and in an open source repo. So if you like anything particularly about the styling of the documentation, you can check out the repo and see how to apply that to your own application. And so I just want to quickly look at the installation part so you can check out how to get started that way. So you'll basically just install the Dash packages with pip. So you'll install Dash, Dash HTML components, Dash core components, and then we just released our Dash data table, which I'm going to talk about a bit later. And so that's in our lead part here of our install documentation as well. So in the documentation, when we make an update, we update the documentation so you have the latest version of the packages available to check out there. Great, so I'm going to just move on so we can check out kind of how to structure the application code, and then look at interactivity and controls in the application. So first, you'll start by creating a Python file, and in that file, you'll define your layout. So here, we're just defining app.layout, and then in that layout, I'll have my main HTML div there. So I'm just using html.div, and then as the children of that, I want to add a drop-down, and then a second div, which I'm going to use as a container. So when I make a selection in the drop-down, the container's children can get updated. So then for the interactivity, we'll use a, actually, can you guys see that? Let me zoom in a little more. So for the interactivity, we'll use a callback. So I'll have my app.callback decorator, and then in that, it will take an output. And so right now, you can only have one output per callback. And then it can take an array of inputs because you can have multiple inputs per callback. So as the output, I'm using, like I mentioned before, the container. So I use the ID of what I want to update, and then the element that I want to update. So I want to update my output container div, and I want to update the children of that. So now for my input, I want to use the dropdown as my input, and my dropdown ID, my dropdown, and then I want to use the value from that. So I'm passing value through my function here, and then I just want to return a string where I'm formatting the value returned from the dropdown. So here, when I make a selection, it will then display my value in the children of that, that div there. So like I mentioned before, we can use multiple inputs in a callback. And so in this example, I'm actually first going to update an input with the first input. So here I'm using America and Canada, and when I make the selection of which country, the city radio buttons will update. And then when I make my selection here as well, the final div here will update appropriately. So if we take a look there, now we'll see in my final callback here, the array includes both the country's dropdown and the city's dropdown values for my input array. So a lot of times in applications, especially data visualization applications, you'll want graph drill down. So when you make a selection in one graph, it will update the next. So this is a super simple example, but it's actually my favorite Dash example. So you can see this in our interactive graphing section of the documentation. And I really like this example because it just lays out how to get that information from the graph interactivity back, so you can then format that and use that to create your callbacks. So I'm just going to, when I interact with the graph here, below the hover data, click data, or zoom and relayout data, I'll just display what's actually returned from Plotly.js in that in these divs here. So we can see, I'm gonna have to zoom out a bit. When I hover on points, we can see down there that the points array is updating. And I'm getting 2 points back because I have my compare hover on, but if I want to move over to closest, when I hover now, I'll only get that 1 point returned. And so we're returning the curve number, which is like which trace, and then also point number, index, and then the X and Y values, as well if you've applied any custom data or text to that trace when you create your graph. And then click data is returned in the same format. Zoom and layout, when you zoom on the graph or zoom back out, which you can do by double clicking, that will update as so. And then I don't have it in this example, but we also have selection. So we do box and lasso selection, which I'll demonstrate a bit later. But we return that data as well. And if you check out the documentation page, the selection's included there. Great. So one of the big things about Dash, which distinguishes it a bit from a lot of the plotly.py work that we saw earlier, where you can have those kind of callback structures as well, is here we allow a lot of the HTML and CSS styling to be done, so you can design your layout and CSS as well. Now, if you're anything like me, who works a lot in Python, you may hate CSS with a driving passion. It's not for me. So I typically use in my apps our super simple CSS style sheet that we host on CodePen, and that's all throughout our documentation. So you can just grab that and apply it to your apps, and you get a basic CSS structure where you can then create rows and columns and get a bit more styling here. So if we scroll down, we can kind of see how we style typography, headers, and then the buttons as well. Yep. So if you love Paint and want to write your own CSS, you can put that inline, or you can use CSS files in your application folder as well. And yep, this is just kind of an example of how your CSS efforts can pay off. So here I have a little application embedded that's kind of in a report design. And so these different tabs will display different sections of the report. But yeah, I'll just emphasize that in addition to the Python, there was some CSS efforts that went into that application. One of the things that I'm working on now, so I think that maybe I didn't mention before, but thus far everything I've discussed, all the packages and all of the Dash stuff that I've discussed it's all open source. So we do have a few closed source additions. And so one thing that we're working on now is a design kit. So it's kind of, we're building a GUI for styling your Dash applications, but I'm not going to demo that or get into it today because it's not part of our open source efforts. But I just want to mention it on this page because of bad talked CSS so much. We're trying to make a solution to avoid some of those issues. And even if no one uses it, I don't care because I use it every day. So great. So I'm kind of wrapping up with my slides here. So I'll just do my ending before the actual end. And I just want to kind of go over a few like get in touch opportunities. So I'm going to host this application. So I'll provide the link to PyData if you want to grab it that way. And I'll also tweet it out via Plotly's Twitter. But some other methods, we have our documentation, GitHub. So that's just the main Dash library, but then we also have repos for Dash core components, Dash HTML components. Those are all listed here. And like I said, all of those are open source, so contributions are super welcome. We also have a forum that's extremely active, so you can get that if you go to our main forum is community.plot.ly and then /c/dash gets you to the Dash specific options there. And then also if you have any questions about my presentation, feel free to email me at chelsea@plot.ly. I'm too shy for my personal Twitter, so you can feel free to email me. Okay, so I'm going to move into the second part of my talk, which is going to be some example applications. So, like I said, this presentation was done in Dash. Our docs were done in Dash. We have a gallery in the docs, which is a big list of a lot of examples we made. If you check out the gallery, let me see if I can get that open for you guys. We have links to not only the hosted application, so you can see the application, but also a link to a GitHub repo where all of the code is. So, yep, we really recommend if you see something you like, forking the repo, and then you can just edit that and apply your own data, or just dig into the code to get a good understanding of how that's done. So yeah, so we have like different examples. So if you click on the title, it will open the application, or you can click on the source code. So I've opened up some of my favorite examples, and then I'll do, I don't think I did the live update one. So the Dash data table, so this is something I mentioned earlier. If anyone's familiar with Dash, you might know that for a really long time, over a year, we had the Dash table experiment repo going on, and just 2 weeks ago, we released our actual version of the Dash data table. So that was a really big effort. It involves some TypeScript, and yep, it just, we're really happy that it's extremely feature intensive, and it's working now. So yep, you can do selections, remove rows, remove columns, sorting, and filtering as well. So we'll see some sorting. Those can then update the graphs. You can also edit. So you can kind of use this as a data table that then applies to the graph. So you might notice this is the Gapminder data set that I've loaded to create the table, but you can create a table and then fill it out or edit it if you want to do a live application there. And then if you check out our documentation on this, you'll notice that we're not super happy with our filtering syntax, but that's something that we're going to change pretty soon. So this is in an alpha version, and while stable, the filtering syntax is definitely subject to change. So here, if I kind of want to filter, I have to do equals a string and then get that filtered there. It also allows for paging as well. So in this application, you can just also do your filtering, do your sorting, and then download the CSV to get that data. Okay, so this is an application that was created by one of our community members. So I'll just quickly go through it. It's pretty interesting. They're just kind of plotting climate change over different kind of lifespans. So you could kind of look at your lineage and see how climate change affects different people that way. So basically, if you make your selections here, it will move around the annotations on the plot, so you can kind of, design it for to see your own life event there. Okay, so here we have an image processing application. So one of our extremely impressive interns who's studying image processing made this, and I'm so happy that he did. So we can do a super cute demo with ponies wearing sweaters. Yeah. So here, here we can kind of, you can upload your own image, and then we're plotting the RGB values down there. You can also do some image processing on the image. So for example, if I really want to focus on the ponies, I can make a selection of not the ponies and then blur that out, I believe. Yep, oops, sorry. Let me undo that. Yep, so I'm going to make my selection, blur, run the operation. So you can notice that this part's a bit blurred now, and we can see how that changed the RGB levels of that image. So what this app is doing, I believe he was using Pillow for this, but he's uploading an image and plotting it on a Plotly grid there, and then running the analysis that way. And the updates of this chart then update the analysis displayed on our histogram here. Okay. Yep, so I mentioned earlier that in addition to the click and hover, we also offer the selection option. So here we can look at different years of poison-induced death rates. So it's a bit grim, so I'll go through it quickly just to show the selection of making a selection on the chart will then display the bars that are age adjusted there. And then we can also select different analyses there, which will then update that bar chart as well. So we can double click to unselect, maybe change the year, and then select a different region. Yep, great. So, yep. And then finally, this is just a quick example of doing using an interval for live updates. So, yep, so you can see on about every second, we're getting updates here. And then the first two graphs are plotted by default. But if we want to maybe remove this USD one, we can then add the next one there or add it back in. So we can add multiple charts. And finally, if we want to get the pound to dollar, can grab that one in too. Yep, so again, just want to quickly demonstrate this as one of the live update options. Okay, so got through that. So now we have a bit of time to look at some of the code. So I'm going to go through and do a super simple application because A, I don't really like live coding, and B, the goal is just so you guys can see the syntax and gain confidence that anyone in this room could quickly make a Dash application. So first I'll open up my app. So to prepare, I've created a folder, and in that folder I have the trusty Gapminder CSV, and then a skeleton app here. And then in case I forget everything, I've also written out my demo application to reference. Great, so I can, oops, I'll have to stop my other application. Great, so now if I open up my local host, we'll see there's nothing there because there's nothing in my application yet. Okay, so I'll explain the parts that I started out with first. So first I have my imports. So in addition to dash core components, and dash HTML components, I'm going to use pandas to read in my CSV and then filter that CSV as well. I'm using the external style sheet because I don't want to write any CSS right now. And so now we're getting on to the dash application part. So here I'm initializing the app. And then I'm going to read that CSV file, and then I'm going to filter by continents. So I'm just starting out by getting a list of the continents that are in that continent column there. So now, like we saw before, typically we'll start the dash application by, you need to initialize the layout. So you do app.layout, and then you have the main HTML div, which I'm going to fill out with the children here. So I'm going to add a header, a dropdown, and then a graph. And then I'll do a simple callback as well. Okay, so for the header, oh, sure, sorry. Yep. Let's see, how is that? That should be pretty good. Okay, great. So we have, I'll just put a header here. And I just want my header to say hello dash. And so I'm really excited because just recently, like I think about within the last month, we've added hot reloading. So now when I save my file, since I have my debug equals true on down here, it will hot reload. So I save and the browser updates. Sorry, when I was describing the skeleton, before I forgot to mention, we'll set the run server as well. And then, you can set debug equals true if you want to get that hot reloading option on. Okay, so I have hello dash, so now I want to add a dropdown. So this was HTML because the header component is in our HTML components. Now I'm going to use dropdown, which is in our dash core components. So I'll do dcc.dropdown. And here I'll set an ID. And then I'll set some options and a value as well. So we'll start for my options. So I'm going to make a drop down of the continents, and I'll set my value to Americas to start off with. So for the options, we have value and label. Oops. So for these, I'm going to set it to country, so that should be 4C. Continents. So let's see if I got that syntax right. Yes. Okay. So our drop down's there. So now for the graph, I'm just going to add our graph in there. So this is going to be another dash core component. And I want my graph to be based on the drop down. So in my layout section here, I'm just going to add the ID. And I don't need anything else because I'm going to define my figure down in my callback. Okay. So let me uncomment my callback structure here. Okay, so like we saw before, I have my callback decorator, and so now for my dash.dependencies.output, I'll include the ID of what I want to output, which is graph, and then I want to update the figure of the graph, of my graph ID there. And then for my input, I want to use the drop down. So I think I call that DD. And I want to use the value. Okay, so now I'm just going to write a function to do whatever I want it to do, which is going to be update the graph. So here I'm going to pass in my input value. So this function is going to take the value, and on the value I want to filter my data frame. So I'm going to say TDF equals DF of continents when that equals my value. I think that needs to be equals equals. Okay, and now I'll set my figure. So in the interest of time, I'm going to copy my figure from what I wrote before. Whoops. Okay, and I think I didn't quite get that right. Oh yeah, sorry. Nope, that should be fine for this one. Yep. Okay. And then, okay, so sorry about that. So I've copied my figure now. So to go through the figure structure, that's going to take data and layout. Data can be an array because you can add multiple traces there, but in this case, we'll only have the one. And then layout's a dictionary here where I'm then setting up the margins just to be a little more app appropriate. And so in my data, I'm going to set X and Y values based on my filtered data frame here. So I want to use country as X, the GDP per capita as Y, and then finally I'll size by life expectancy. And then I want to return the figure. And so here we can see our super simple app, and when I make my selections here, that will update. And everything in here is resizable by default, but you can set that up to not be, to be static, or we can set our width to be a percent. So for example, if I want to center my title here, I can add the CSS properties inline in the style dictionary, or here we could wrap this in a div and then set that div width to be, we can just do it. So now the drop down is the children of the div, and I can set style here. Maybe some padding. And so now we're a little more styled and looking a little more app ready. Okay, great. So I just wanted to give a quick example of what the code looks like there, so you can see that and feel like you're ready to get up and running if you choose. And yep, I think we have some time for questions now.
This is awesome, by the way.
Thanks.
I have a couple questions, but I'll ask one and wait because I'll go for my question.
Sure.
I guess the first question I have is, I noticed in the documentation there's a lot of examples that sort of package sort of a single page application with everything in it. I tend to try to separate things out, and so if I'm working on stuff, I'll have like the figures in a separate sort of file. Is that internally, is there a good way to do that? Do you recommend doing that, or recommend against sort of having the figures be somewhere else and then just like calling the figures into a callback, like separating that out? Or do you guys recommend like having it all together?
Yep, so the question, it's more on how to structure and organize the code, right? Yep, for the documentation purposes, you're totally right. We usually put everything in one file, and that's so people can copy and paste. But if you take a look at some of the more intense examples, you'll notice that we do kind of take the approach that you mentioned, where you can put figures in one file and then call that, or basically put anything in different files. And so, yep, if you take a look at some of the longer applications, you'll notice that we typically do break things into multiple files and then import from the different Python files. So my applications that I work on will typically have like 5 to 10 Python files, and I'll write out like reusable components. So for example, like I mentioned, the styling is a pain point. So when I get a header that is centered that I like, I just make that into a header component and then import that header.py file in all of my functions and just replace the title and reuse that. Does that answer the question? Yep. Yeah, no problem. Yep.
Is there any limitations on the libraries that can be imported, like particularly Matplotlib and Seaborn and other kind of graphical libraries?
Yep. Yeah, you can import what you like. We typically, we pretty much only have examples with graphing of using Plotly, because that allows you to get the graph in the callback using that dcc.graph. It would probably not work straightforward for you right out of the box using because you need to have the interactivity to get that to work in the callback. Sorry, the question was about using other graphing libraries in conjunction with Dash. So you can import it in your Python file and graph it, but to get to use it in the callback, you'll need to actually be using the Plotly library straight out of the box there. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Do you have any simple layouts? Kind of like shiny dashboard?
Yep, so what we've done is we don't have a simple template, but rather this is the case where instead of creating like simple templates and putting all of those up, we have kind of templated out a lot of examples. So like I mentioned, all the codes for all of our examples are on GitHub. So we kind of recommend, if you find a layout that you like there, you fork that and then edit based on that. In the documentation, we also have, if you're using that CSS style sheet that we offer, you can use rows and columns, and they're kind of like the bootstrap method. So you can set up define your columns based on a 12 column grid. And yep.
If I deploy an app, can it handle multiple user sessions?
Yep. Yeah, that's a great question. So the question's about deploying an app and handling multiple user sessions. And I'm so glad you asked that, because that was kind of the whole point of Dash is, many people can be using the application at once, and it's all independent across users. So I could open this application, you can open it, you can open it. We can all open it and play around with it and get a parallel experience there. Thanks. Yep.
Since this is ultimately a Flask app, we did want to deploy it. We can just follow best practices for deploying Flasks, right?
Yep. So typically, yes. You might have noticed a lot of the examples I showed were deployed on Heroku, and we have instructions on deploying on Heroku as well online. Yep. Otherwise, yep, you can use Flask and deploy, like if you want to edit and deploy on OpenShift or anything like that. That's possible. And then for enterprise use, we also offer a server you can deploy on, but that's not part of the open source package. Great. Any other questions? Nope. Cool. Well, if anyone has any questions, definitely let me know or send me an email. Thanks.